Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Journeys with Jeff. Nice to see you again. And we have a very, very interesting guest tonight on our show. A gentleman named Jim Ligas. He lives in West Hartford, right? You live in West Hartford now, right, Jim? Mm-hmm. Jim is from Barberton, Ohio. Born and raised in Barberton. And he got a PhD in biomedical engineering from Case Western Reserve, and also an MD from Case Western Reserve. And he was hired out of college from St. Francis Hospital. That's what brought you to Connecticut, right, Jim?
Right.
And what was your, well, first of all, what was it like growing up in Barberton, Ohio? What was, were you from a big family?
It was a town of 65,000 people, many of whom were Polish or Slovak. My dad was one of 11. My mother was an only child. I was one of 6, and I've got 47 first cousins the last time I counted.
Oh my gosh. And they were all living in that area?
Yes.
So you must have had a lot of family.
Oh, my dad's parents had a little farm, and his dad also worked in the factory, but pretty much every Sunday we would go there, and us kids would run around. The men would pitch horseshoes, the women would sit around and talk.
And what did your dad do?
My dad worked in a factory.
So he's kind of a working class guy.
Oh, yeah.
And you had how many siblings? 6 of you?
There were 6 of us, yeah.
So how did you go from, what happened that you went from a very modest working class background to get a PhD and an MD?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I went to a Catholic elementary school, and it turned out I was the smartest kid in the class. So when I was done with that, I got a 4-year scholarship to an all-boys Catholic high school in Akron. And that was really rigorous. And I had, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I had always been interested in science fiction. So when I was about 8 or 9 years old, that was when Sputnik went up. Oh, and I decided I wanted to do something aeronautical. So when I graduated from high school, I went to the Ohio State University, as we say, and got a degree in engineering. For 2 years, I went to work for General Electric at their large jet engine division in Cincinnati, but I didn't like working in a cubicle. And my wife at the time was a nurse, and it seemed to me that medicine could benefit from a more mathematical approach and more science. And so I talked to one of my friends, and he said, look, if you're going to go through all the trouble of getting a PhD in biomedical engineering, he said, I grew up in Cleveland, and they have an MD PhD program, and you can do both of them together. So I ended up leaving GE to go to Case.
I see. Now, did any of your other siblings follow suit? Were they your other brothers and sisters? Did they also get PhDs and MDs? And
No. Our family was strange because it was 3 sets of 2. I'm the eldest. I had a brother who was a year younger than I am.
Yeah.
Then I had 2 sisters who were 9 and 11 years younger than I am. And then a brother and sister who were 16 and 17 years younger than I am.
How did that happen? All the same parents?
Yes.
So your parents kind of got...
They were good Catholics.
The rhythm method there.
They were good Catholics.
Wow. But you were the eldest of all.
Yeah. So my brother, who's a year younger than I am, got a master's in math and spent his career working for AT&T. And my youngest brother became an accountant. So they went to college, but my 3 sisters never went to college. Oh. Even though they were very bright.
Now, when you went to that exclusive Catholic school that you said, where, Akron, did you say?
Akron.
Did that require you to leave home and you moved away from home? And
no.
Or you went to home and school, you commuted?
Right, we commuted.
So you lived near Akron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As you grew older, as you became an adult, you did not continue to practice Catholicism.
No, I didn't.
Why? I don't want to get personal, too personal, but is it something that you just kind of
Outgrew. You know, I have a friend who's a priest now, and he said, if I teach the standard line, everyone says you're teaching a religion for children. And he said, if I get more mystical and, more expansive, he said, people report me to the bishop. So,
is that what the priest said to you?
yeah. But in the days when I was younger, the Catholic Church was pretty much by the book, right? Here's the things you believe, and here's what you do. And I had a falling out one time. I was in a Bible study group, and we had a nice young priest who was more open-minded, but he was replaced by an older priest who said, he said something about, we're always fighting against our inherently evil nature. And I said, Father, I don't think people are evil. I think most people are doing the best they can given their fears and their understanding of how life works. And he went on a tirade about that's intellectual arrogance. And I basically said, I can't be part of an institution if it's based on fear and guilt.
Yeah, that's a fundamental difference, and I know because we met at at a Buddhist group. That's how Jim and I got to know each other. There are several fundamental differences in a lot of religions. There are a lot of overlap too. If anybody out there saw my last week's show, there are a lot of similarities between belief in the various belief systems about God, for instance. But in some religions, we'll have to name them specifically, but you said that, like, there are some religions that teach the believers, the people, that we're inherently sinful, born inherently bad, and there are other belief systems, and I think you'll agree that Buddhism is one of them, and that is that kind of the opposite of that is that we do have a lower nature, but we are inherently good. That we're not we're not evil or bad to begin with.
Right.
Does that sound about?
Yeah, that Buddhism teaches that the fundamental problem is ignorance. We don't realize the way reality really works. And so we cling to good things and try to make them last forever, and we try to avoid bad things rather than accepting what's happening and dealing with it skillfully in the moment.
Yeah.
So it's more about ignorance of the way life really works than it is about evil.
Well, what is it do you suppose, when you had this discussion years ago with this priest, what is it that was in you that made you part ways? Because there are some people, as you know, whether you're a Jew or a Christian or whatever the religion, a lot of people have that kind of embedded in them as in early years, and they adhere to it for the rest of their lives very strongly. There are other people who move away from it or develop different thoughts about it and thinking about it. What is it that what do you think it was that made you think differently about the beliefs that were imposed upon you when you were a little boy?
I found them to be very destructive in that, if you always think that you're evil and everyone else is evil, how do you relate to people and how do you accept them as they are?
Now, you found them to be that way by thinking about it?
Yes, yeah. And I think someone wrote, everybody has a path to the divine, and there are many paths. And they said, but you have to choose the path that for you has heart. And my gut instinct was that, God, the divine, oneness, whatever you want to call it, is kind and loving rather than punishing. And so that's the path I had to follow.
St. Francis Hospital hired you, and what kind of medicine did you practice?
Well, I had done my residency in surgery and then a fellowship in critical care. So for a while I did some surgery, but most of the time I worked in the intensive care unit.
Okay, so critical care means?
Working in the intensive care unit and being in charge of patients who are sick enough to be there.
And so there are people, you worked with people who were at a stage in their life where they were facing death, and that must have had an effect on you also.
It did. You know, people ask me how I could be so happy having worked there. I said, because my worst day is so much better than many people's best day, that how could I not be happy?
And how working with these people in the capacity as an MD, how I mean, other than treating their physical maladies, how did you give them moral support and psychological and spiritual support too?
Yeah, I would tell the residents that our job consisted of 3/3. 1/3 was medical care, 1/3 was psychiatry, and 1/3 was clergy. And if you weren't interested in the other 2/3 of the job, you shouldn't be in this field.
Very good.
So yeah, lots of family meetings to decide both about how much care is enough, what was going to happen after the patient left the hospital. And yes, I did 32 years of many, many family meetings and many discussions with patients.
You were at St. Francis, then you went to, where did you go after that?
I went to UConn. I was at St. Francis for 4 years, then I went to UConn for 20, and then to Bay State for 8.
And you were pretty much the same?
Working in intensive care unit all the time.
Same thing. And then after that, coming into the, meanwhile, in your family, your personal life, I assume that you got married. You said you were married. Did you have children?
5.
You have 5 children. And how old are they now?
Oh, the oldest is 43 and the youngest is 25.
Wow. And are they kind of spread out?
Oh, everywhere, yeah.
How are they doing?
They're doing well. I'm proud of them. They've done what they wanted to do, and seem to be happy.
And do you feel that you kind of I think most parents do or should do is to, and as they grow up, to enable them to fly on their own and you found that rewarding that you were able to?
Sure. The interesting thing is, your kids don't seem to be real people till they're in their 30s, right? When they've settled down and decided what it is they're going to do. Before that, they're still being formed. And then when they hit their 30s is when you go, wow, they're real adults now.
Yeah. How many sons?
I've got 2 sons. You ask me that, I can't remember. I've got 2 daughters and 3 sons. Yeah. And I've got 3 grandchildren now, so far.
Wow. So that must be fun being a grandparent.
Yeah, it's hard because they're scattered all over the country. But I try to see them every 3 or 4 months or so.
Is there any of them closer to here? Or?
No, closest is Ohio, and the farthest is Austin, Texas.
So you and your wife have decided to, now that you're retired, and you're originally from Ohio, and your kids are spread out, you guys decided to stay in Connecticut.
Well, we got divorced about, I don't know, 2001, 22 years ago.
Oh,
And I have a long-term partner of 13 years, and she has 2 sons here, and a lot of our family is here.
Okay,
So we've stuck around here.
so that's, yeah, I got you. Right. Okay, all right, wow. And then now we're talking about after, I guess after, or is it during these stints at St. Francis and UConn and Bay State, you got into something that you started? Did you start this? It's called Spiritual Companioning for Groups and Individuals.
No, that's the Spiritual Life Center in West Hartford on Tunxus. Shares space with the monastery.
Uh-huh.
And they have for 39 years, they've existed for 39 years, and I think they've run an internship in spiritual direction for 28 years. So after I retired, I was talking to someone who knew of this, and they said, you know, you've basically been accompanying people on their spiritual journeys for 32 years. You would be a natural to sign up for this program. So I did the 2-year internship in spiritual direction, and now I'm helping with the next internship class.
Okay, so it already existed when you came.
Right.
When you.
Yeah. And it's kind of a misnomer because it's spiritual companioning, not direction. You know, you don't direct people. You sit with them and listen to what they have to say and what their problems are. And I always have 3 questions I keep in my mind. The first is, what gives your life meaning? And the second is, how does that play out in your life? And the third is, how would you like it to change and go deeper?
And these people that you, with whom you interact at the Spiritual Companioning for Groups, how do they, how do they get referred to the, do they hear about it, or they get referred by?
There's a website for Spiritual Life Center, West Hartford, and a lot of people find the website. Other people are referred by word of mouth, but as far as I can tell, it's sort of the best kept secret around. And I think a lot of people are turned off by the word spiritual. They don't identify the deepest thing in their life as spiritual. You know, I've often said somebody could tell me the most important thing in their life is money, and I would still say that's spiritual. You know, do you want money because you feel insecure? Do you want money because you want to do good with it? Let's talk about what money means to you and how it plays out in your life and how you could have a better sense of purpose and worth by dealing with it. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no topic that isn't spiritual.
Yeah. So you have people of all ages that come there?
It's usually the older people. Young people aren't very interested, it seems, in a spiritual life. I think you have to be at a certain stage of life before you can do that.
How do you distinguish between, and a lot of people these days, these 2 words, religious and spiritual? A lot of people say, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual, or, you know, is there a difference in your mind?
Yeah, a great author, Robert Heinlein, once wrote that religion bears the same relationship to spirituality as history does to truth. That is, none to speak of. They're very different. Religion is more about dogma and believing in dogma, and spirituality is feeling that there's a greater meaning to your life. In fact, one of my fellow interns, when I did the internship, was an atheist. But he was doing an internship in spiritual companioning because he thought, you know, people had this drive to be good and do good. And he thought, that's really spiritual, whether they believe in God or not.
So you're saying that in some cases, religion can be, rather than facilitate a spiritual acquisition, sometimes religion can impede it and get in the way of it.
Get in the way. And sometimes it's just a social thing. I go to church on Sunday and go to the coffee hour, but the rest of the week I do what I want.
Can you think of some religious people who have been both religious and taken some of the like you said, a lot of religion is tied down to ritual and dogma and stuff like that. But there are a lot of people out there,
many
of different religions, who see their religion not just in that way, but in they look at the moral and the ethical values that their religion tries to teach them, and that's what I think a lot of religions have in common. Right. I think I'm sure you've heard of Thomas Merton, the Seven-Story Mountain.
Oh yeah,
and he was a great ecumenicalist, and he saw a lot of overlap. If you look at the moral values and the ethical teachings of the various religions, there's a very, very similar, because they're all talking about live your life, engaging other people with as much love and compassion and unconditional positive regard as you possibly can, and that's really the spiritual path. So spirituality and religion don't have to be mutually exclusive, but unfortunately, some people some of the religious leaders what would you say, they hijack the religion? And
I think so. Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I think there are a lot of religious people who are very, very spiritual. But it's kind of an overlap, right? Like a Venn diagram, that these over here is people who are totally religious, over here are people who are totally spiritual, but there's a big overlap in the center where people are both.
Yeah.
And if it works for them, who am I to say that they should do something different?
Right.
As I said before, you have to choose the path that has heart for you.
Choose the path that has heart. I'm just wondering do you think that this culture that we're immersed in lends itself to for people being more spiritual and more loving and more compassionate, or does it lend itself to be more competitive and acquisitive and so on? Do you think it's helping or hurting, or is what?
I think it would be easier to be spiritual in a more simple lifestyle. The man walking behind the oxen with his plow and spending 8 hours plowing the field probably has more time to be introspective and contemplative and spiritual than we do, just because there's more alone time, more downtime, fewer distractions.
Yeah. Now, what were those 3 questions that you said that you asked people? You asked them 3 questions.
Oh, what is the main thing that gives your life meaning?
Okay.
How does that play out in your life? And how could you go further on that path?
And go further on that path. All right. Now, let me sit down here, and I'm going to be Jim, and you're going to be whoever, and ask you those questions.
Okay.
All right. How do you get your meaning from life?
I get my meaning by, first of all, I think the universe is pretty much love. I really think the universe is benign if we're paying attention. Bad things happen, but as we Zen people say, you can always, pain is a part of life, but suffering is optional. You can inflict suffering on yourself. So loving kindness gives my life meaning. And as I said, if you can get out of your head, out of this whole idea of avoiding unpleasant things and getting pleasant things, and just pay attention to the moment, I think reacting skillfully in the moment is what gives you great pleasure.
Now, See, here's a problem, or what could be a problem, because what gives you Jim Ligas pleasure might not be the same thing that gives somebody else pleasure.
That's right.
One person's pleasure could be another person's pain. How do you throwing these words like pleasure and goodness and love around can be very tricky.
Well, I guess for someone like that, if I was sitting with them, I would try to get at why they feel that way. I mean, they may say, I'm afraid. People who are not like me are going to take over the world and I'm going to be disenfranchised.
So a lot of it is like fear-based.
I think so.
They're fearful.
Yeah, and I think particularly for men, I don't know if you would agree with this, that anger is an emotion of strength. So if men are feeling threatened or abused or even just frustrated or embarrassed or guilty, they project anger because that's a position of strength. All those other emotions seem to be positions of weakness. So I think a lot of the anger comes from fear.
And getting back to going to that, if you have a person or a group of persons who can look, fear is part of our human nature. It's part of who we are.
Right.
If there's a person or persons or some entity there in the power structure as it is that can capitalize or stoke that fear, get you to be afraid by demagoguery, by scapegoating, by saying the problems that we have or that you're experiencing are because of that person or because of that group. They get you to be afraid.
Right.
And fear is if you can get a person's fear level, the amygdala, the midbrain, that's millions of years old.
Right.
Our prefrontal cortex, that our reasoning power, that's relatively new.
Right.
So when fear and reason face off, if that fear level gets high enough, fear is going to blow reason right out of the water.
Right. That's true.
So if you can get people to be fearful enough against about what you want them to be afraid of, to follow you, then you're gonna do it. You can do it. It's easy to do.
True.
So how can spirituality, or how can people who have a higher, who are inclined to be more reasonable, more loving, not as susceptible to that, how can they counter this wave sometimes, this tsunami of hate and racism and fear that sometimes can permeate poison the atmosphere, this toxicity? How can they do that?
I think it's only going to happen one person at a time. Sitting with someone, understanding them, and hopefully getting them to change their mind.
Let me ask you a question here. From all the experiences that you've had in life with your family and with your siblings and in college and as a doctor, and what would you say is one or two of the most important lessons that you've learned from life?
I've learned that by trying to get what I want, I suffer. I beat my head against the wall. Reality is what it is, and we don't control it.
No, that's a good lesson.
So learning to accept what is and deal with it skillfully Leads to a lot less pain.
If somebody said, if somebody could only read one book for the rest of their life, they can only have one book to read for the rest of their life, what book would you recommend they read?
Lately, I've been working with a few people at the Spiritual Life Center to develop a program called Befriending Death. And the book for that we're going to use for that is by Atul Gawande, a surgeon who's originally Indian but lives in the United States, works in Boston. It's called Being Mortal, and it's about how to make nursing homes and senior citizens' homes more livable than institutional. And it has some great chapters on accepting the fact that your life is going to end. It's a great book. A really great book.
What's it called again?
Being Mortal.
And if there are people out there also, any of the viewers maybe want to talk more about the spiritual companioning or get in touch with you, is there a website? We are out of time, and it's been a fascinating discussion, and another very fascinating, interesting account of another wonderful life. And thank you for coming and sharing your ideas and your thoughts and your life with us. And to the viewers, thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Jeff Grandy, take care.